G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now, I missed yesterday. I was just fried. I think it's been a bit of like work stress, gym, whatever. I just literally didn't get off the couch all day yesterday. But I had like a 12 and a half hours sleep last night, and I'm actually feeling a lot better. So let's get into an update and see what we're going to speak about today. Russian aircraft going down, a new train line, some equipment losses, and of course, then a look at the maps. But firstly, where we will start is Ukraine today celebrated Defenders Day for the first time on a new date, moved from the original 14th of October to the 1st as part of the reforms of the church calendar led by Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now, a minute's silence was observed, and in Zelensky's address, he has said, "Today, we thank everyone who stood, stands, and will stand strong, all those who were the first to take on a difficult battle. Never again will Ukraine pay with its sovereignty for illusionary promises of peace. Our unity must enable us to go all the way to drive the occupier out of our land, and it will." I also want to talk about two things that Soldier X spoke about, both online and offline chats, that's becoming more and more apparent. Now, the first one was barrels on weapons being a big problem, that the barrels start wearing out, and from there that can be one of the big losses of artillery. Isn't just that the piece gets hit or you don't have the ammo. The barrel wears out, and the further you push the artillery systems, being the further range you want to get, you're putting more propellant behind the shell, therefore wearing out the barrel faster. And the other thing he spoke about was without Western air support, the counteroffensive will be very difficult, and that the West should take some responsibility and accountability if it doesn't go to plan. And we're going to talk about those movements of the counteroffensive a little bit later on, and should there be some accountability, because we would not go on this without any level of air support or even more long-range strikes before something like this. But we're going to go on to the barrel thing a little bit more, and some losses of vehicles, and we'll see where their offensive has picked up and dropped down. Now, all the graphs I'm going to be using is actually from this guy here. So Richard Vereka does a fantastic job putting these like Excel graphs together. So credit to him of all of this. So what he was looking at was the use of the artillery and then the losses by barrel type. So he says here, also, it's worth keeping an eye on Russian artillery losses. For most of the war, Russia has been relying on its 152mm guns for the majority of its RT needs, but that seemed to have changed. For at least as percentage of the total confirmed lost artillery, the self-propelled gun, and towed when sorted by caliber, the data does confirm this. So, of course, this is only with these graphs off what is lost from that war spotting picks up. So it doesn't exactly mean that's what's being used. Maybe they're just losing less of them, if that makes sense, because the photos come out confirmed, then the losses goes on from there. But what you can sort of draw the parallels of this, will if more start being lost, therefore you can assume that more are being used on the front line, if that can make sense. So we see here the 203 and 240mm guns here, that they have really picked up over these coming months, that there has been more losses of these, and a drop here in the losses of the 152, which is used the most, as you can see by the grey. Also, a decline in the 122mm and the 120mm here, and a slight increase then in the 152, the Giant weapon system there as well. So we can see that more are being lost, less being lost of different types of systems here. So it's just interesting to look at the data and see what is more apparent on the front line, what's not. And what a lot are saying is that these are systems that can have some barrel swapped out. So you may see a significant drop in losses in some areas, and then the losses pick up. So there has been losses, then they've taken what back off the front line, either swapped the barrel from the lost onto something new, or pulled a barrel out of storage, put it onto something else, and then you can see where these then go, that you may have an increase or decrease in that. So like I was saying, what we can see, the pick up and drop down of this counteroffensive, we can see with the losses of certain pieces of equipment. So here we'll have a look then at the tank losses. Now, of course, we can see the totals here. Now, this is off war spotting. Some people have significantly different amounts of this, but this is just with the amount that they've said have been lost. So in total, it's over 1,700 have lost. That 1,189 have been from in storage, and 56 then captured. But what we can see here, the bit part that I'm interested in, is you can see where this is picked up and dropped down over the counter offensive. So April, May, June, July, well, really May, June, July is when the most amount of offensive action was happening. We see it pick up most around June, and then in July at 73, and then August has dropped down to 51 and back down to 34 in September. So that sort of pick up and drop down of how much is actually going on, how hard Ukraine is pushing, because the more they're pushing, you would expect to see these losses of bits of equipment go up and down. And this is replicated over basically all of the equipment. Let's then have a look at then the artillery pieces. So total, we have 941. Let's have a look here. So overall on the total here, we will see this then drop down. So June, July, August, look at the totals, 38, 72, 45, and then we're back down at 38. So we had a massive push around July, which I believe is the same time we saw the highest, highest on the tanks as well. Now you can look at the specific types here as well, but as you can see under all the types, except for the very last type, which is the multi-launch rocket system, has been very close. But all of these, you can see that July was when Ukraine was pushing the hardest by all then the Russian losses. Then let's have a look at the helicopters used over the war. Now, we need to look at too is really the Kar-52, which is used the most against the counteroffensive against the tanks here. They've lost a total of 36, but overall 84 choppers. Now, let's have a look over the end of this offensive. We can see where these are being lost, and then none in September here. But there is more Kar-52s and Mi-8s being used. So then we see the Mi-8 is below it here. We can see that these are the most actually taken out. So we can somewhat say then the most used in the front, unlike the other ones in this. But you can see then this drop down in here. So 4 were lost over June and only the 1 lost in August. Now this is again from War Spotter's numbers. Then we have a look at the infantry fighting vehicles losses. This is where Russia has just had unbelievably massive losses in this. Overall, we're talking 3,600, a huge amount of numbers. But let's have a look at what the other numbers shown was when Russia took the most amount of losses in July, when we presume Ukraine was pushing the hardest on the counteroffensive. And let's have a look now. So before their counteroffensive, 82, 90. Now before this is when we're talking about Bakhmut, so Russia was taking larger losses. But then we see June, July, August, these pick up 114, 129, 111, so that same in July, and then back down to 49 in September. So pick up and drop down, and this is replicated as well over the infantry mobility vehicles. Let's have a look here. In defense, we're not going to see as many losses of these IMVs as we originally saw when Russia is really pushing through, but August was the most, then followed by June, May, very little in July here, but then September we're back at 4. So sort of mid-range on that. But you can see what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is around July, basically all these numbers, at least of choppers, fighting vehicles, artillery, tanks is when the most. So we presume that was when Ukraine was pushing the most on that counter-offensive there, and the losses of the Russian equipment tend to reflect this in. Now, in the Zap Oblast, a friendly fire incident from Russia has downed its own Su-34 aircraft, and this was then confirmed by fighter bomber. Of course, fighter bomber is a Russian fighter bloody jet pilot bomber, and that's where we get a lot of the information and confirmations from here. So this is it down on the ground there. Now, also the pilot has been killed because he has said in this post, eternal flight brother. So we're presuming that he has been killed there as well. Now, something that's been going around everywhere is everyone's saying that the UK is going to send troops to Ukraine. That is not happening, neither in a training or a fighting capacity. Where this all comes from was the UK Defence Secretary, the new bloke, Grant Shapps, who's in Ukraine at the moment. He said, I was talking today about eventually getting the training brought closer and actually into Ukraine as well, particularly in the west of the country. I think the opportunity now is to bring more things in country. Chair of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, then had this to say about it. The number of idiots in power in NATO countries is growing. One newly minted moron, the British Secretary of State for Defence, decided to move the UK's military training of Ukrainian soldiers into Ukraine. That is, to turn British military instructors into our armed forces' legal targets while being fully aware that they will be ruthlessly eliminated. And this time not as mercenaries, but as British NATO specialists. Another fool from Bundestag, the chairwoman of German Defence Committee with an unpronounceable surname, is clamouring to immediately provide this with Taurus missiles to enable the Kiev regime to hit deep into Russia's territory to weaken the supply of our army. That is, it is in the accordance with international law. Well, in that case, the strikes against German plants which produce these missiles will also fully correspond with international law. Really, these half-wits are actively pushing us to World War III. Now, I'm not really sure what is going on with the Taurus missile system. It's sort of in between of what is happening. Confirmations, they're not we don't bloody know. But as well here, like we said, that it was all off the back of what the bloke said, but this isn't actually happening because UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has had to clarify, saying what the Defence Secretary was saying was that it might be well possible one day in the future for us to do some of that training in Ukraine. But that's something for the long term, not the here and now. There are no British soldiers that will be sent to fight in the current conflict. Now, with this, especially in the training, I don't see any benefit to it anyway. The risk is just not worth the reward. Just take the Ukrainian soldiers out of Ukraine, take them to the UK or somewhere in Europe, and then train them. Europe is very, very small. There's no point in like having training interruptions, being in the line of attack like Medvedev has said they'll do. There's no point of that doing it in Ukraine at the moment. Maybe after they're doing exercises training there, but just take the guys out where you can have absolutely no training limits at all, and then back in. I just don't see the point in that. Now, there has been a lot of rumour about a new train link that Russia want to make, really between what they're saying was, let's go into this map because that one sucks to look at, to try and make it easier if the Kerch Strait Bridge gets taken down here to get supplies into the south of the country and into Crimea, whatever from there. Now, the rumours always have been from Melitopol to Mariupol was going to be built up on a train link. Now, we have today really confirmations that between Mariupol and Volnovakha here to Donetsk, back into Russia, there will be a train link, and actually has said that it is being started. Now, let's have a look at what, this is the old Mariupol mayor, not the new one. So this is like the Ukrainian Mariupol mayor, not the one who was put in since Russia have occupied it. So the occupiers are trying to build a direct railway connection with Mariupol, Volnovakha, where we spoke about, and Donetsk. Now, it's not just chatter. They started building a railway bridge near the village, Granati, across the Kalimas River. If successful, this will allow the existing branch of Mariupol, this to be included in a direct connection with the Rostov-on-Don, which is in Russia across here. In practice, this is not only a global solution to the issue of military and civilian logistics, but also a drastic reduction in dependence on railway communications via the Crimean Bridge. Let me remind you that the railway connection from Volnovakha to the west goes through Rozivka, Melitopol to Crimea, and also provided with some photographs of the starting of one of the bridges here. So they wanted to build between really here. We can see this train line up through here, but we know some of the bridges were taken out. So we have this short graph here. So this is Melitopol, this is Volnovakha here, and then a push out that will end up in Rostov-on-Don. And then we also heard this try to have a connection between Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Melitopol. We spoke about that only the other day. As we know, this railway is in range of weapon systems, but down around here will be for some weapon systems, but not all. Rails have a lot of pros and cons. Yes, it's easy to take out a piece of railway with something, but it's also very, very quick to rebuild. And the Kiev Post had this to say about it. If completed, the line would dramatically reduce rail traffic between Russia and occupied Crimea via the Kerch Bridge, where we have seen the Kerch Bridge targeted and will definitely see it, and substantially ease Russian military logistics in the Donetsk-Zap sectors. Following the October strike, Ukrainian forces have attacked the Kerch Bridge with missiles and kamikaze sea drones, but with limited success. Russian forces defending the bridge in July sunk barges and ferries near the bridge to deter robot boat attacks. Raids by explosives carrying boats launched by the Ukrainians have continued, making the Kerch Strait an important waterway for Russian commercial sea traffic, dangerous to use. In comments cited by the Union news agency, the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense Ukraine, Kirill Budinov, said that Ukrainian forces would keep on attacking the Kerch Bridge and eventually destroy it. Ukraine's long-term strategy is first to destroy Russia's military supply chain in regions occupied by Moscow forces as a precursor to liberation, which in here we know that getting stuff in and out for Russia is going to be very difficult if the Kerch, both the road and rail bridge, is taken out to get it into the south. This is where we spoke about that it could be, well, before the counteroffensive, we thought that they would try and push straight down through Tokmak, try and get to Melitopol, Berdyansk, somewhere in here, at least to Tokmak, so the artillery is in range of stopping all this. But if this were to be built, getting logistics and supplies in could be more easily done. I don't know how building railways goes over the wetter, colder winter months. Now, the Ministry of Defence of the UK has had this to say. Documents apparently leaked from Russia's finance ministry suggest that Russia's defence spending is set to surge to approximately 30% of total public expenditure in 2024. The ministry proposes a defence budget of 10.8 trillion rubles, equivalent to approximately 6% of GDP, and a 68% increase over 2023. So increasing that defence budget a lot. It is highly likely that Russia can support this level of defence spending through 2024, but only at the expense of the wider economy. So defence spending goes up, all the other bits and pieces of the economy will go down. Same, it's just economics. You've got two things full of water and you tip some in somewhere, this one's going to be less full. Full details on Russian defence spending are always classified, but these figures suggest that Russia is preparing for multiple further years of fighting in Ukraine. This follows public comments by Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu on the 27th of September 23, suggesting he was prepared for the conflict to continue into 2025. We know that both Russia and the West are really fueling up for a much longer war than was at least initially expected here. So, of course, it's the start of October. That means we get summaries out about how the war went over the last month. Now, we have War Mapper, who's, I think, the most conservative to show gains and losses as well, but we have their overall summary of how this all went as well. Now, this was put up with a post saying, over the month of September, Ukraine has successfully reclaimed approximately 35 squared kilometres from Russian forces, the same as last month. This means that Russia currently occupies a total of 17.48% of Ukraine. So, of course, we can see here that in the red is Russian gains, in the yellow is Ukrainian gains. As we can see, this is when Russia pulled back from Kyiv here in April, that Ukraine got back a lot of that occupied territory, and that Russia made very small gains over the rest of 2022 from here. And then Ukraine took back a lot as Russia both pulled back and Ukraine had their offensive into Kherson and Kharkiv the end of last year around this time. And then, of course, this is the start of the year, being when Russia was really attacking through Bakhmut areas like this. And then we can see here, this is when Ukraine has gone on the main offensive here as well. So clearing 0.01, 0.01, 0.01. So very small gains across there as well. Now, I know that some ground means more than others, but it's still only a very small amount in the large scheme of things. So we can see here in the yellow is what area is actually controlled by Ukraine overall, being 100% of the territory. And in the orangey red is what Russia has actually gained across this, because of course this will remain the same, because the purple is since 2024, that there will be just a small shift. That's right, a small shift in these later months of that 0.01%. New York Times has put up an article. The New York Times tends to be a bit more on the sort of it's not pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian. It's more neutral, but sometimes throws a bit of shade at Ukraine. And if you have any just hint of criticism anywhere, instantly you're basically working for the Kremlin, apparently. But this is what the New York Times has put up. Who's gaining ground in Ukraine this year? No one. Although both sides have launched ambitious offensives, the front line has barely shifted. After 18 months of war, a breakthrough looks more difficult than ever. And as we saw, Russia has made very, very little. Ukraine has made very, very little in this year. Both sides of this year with lofty ambitions. Russia wanted to capture the eastern Donbass region, while Ukraine aimed to split Russian forces with an attack in the south. Neither offensive has gone to plan. The front line, after months of grueling combat and heavy casualties, remains largely unchanged. And of course, here we can see in the red, which is where Russia is on the offensive in the earlier months, Ukraine getting it back in the blue. And then we can see Russia's winter offensive, 100 square miles per month. And then Ukraine's counteroffensive has begun, and the lease territory changed in August by any month so far. And if you line this up with what we spoke about in the beginning, with the amount of weapons being lost, that August has less of those Russian losses of weapons than the months previously here as well. Now, let's have a look over then this. So then we have these two graphs here, which when both sides' gains are added up, Russia now controls nearly 200 square miles more territory in Ukraine compared with the start of the year. So since January the 1st, Ukraine has gained 143 square miles, but since the start of the year, that Russia has gained 331 square miles. So Russia's net gain there of 180 square miles, which is smaller than Kyiv and smaller than New York City. But as we know, with both sides have learnt, each other's tactics. There's so much fighting going on, and these are very important areas being fought for as well. But it is interesting to see these very small changes on here, especially when we thought we were going to see a massive change very quickly. Now, Surak has had this to say: since the summer until yesterday, the Russian aircraft destroyed practically all the bridges over the Oskil River between Kupiansk and that connected troops on the Lugansk front with the rear in Kharkiv. Despite the fact that there are still bridges further south, the supply lines to the Ukrainian army are extending more and more, so the troops could start suffering from a shortage of supplies soon, and that would eventually lead to progressive retreat towards the Oskil River. With the weakening of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south, the fronts extending from the Oskil River to the north of Bakhmut will be reactivated, and it is very likely that we'll see a Russian offensive action. Perhaps a new Bakhmut is in the sights. So what they're talking about is the Oskil River, which of course this is the Oskil up through here in Kupiansk, that Russia is destroying the bridges across here, trying to have geolocated footage of this to try and extend Ukraine's supply lines through here. So although there are bridges to the south, that is just further weakening the supply lines in that area, at least attempting to from there. And we do have some footage as well that they've put out of this GIF here of hitting then these bridges through here too. And there has been multiple taken in there. We've reported as those have gone. So the ground lines of communication of logistics in there could be struggling a little bit in that region. Now let's go on to the deep state map. And of course, we have Ukraine center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 14. We've seen nothing in the west. We come down to the Orokhiv-Robotyny sector. Again, deep state not showing really much movement in here. We go back from 29th to 30th. We just see this slight shift of this like nub in here that Ukraine pushed a little bit in sort of to the northwest of Verbove, but not too much of a shift there. But this whole area hasn't really changed in a while. So let's go back through the 25th, 24th. Let's go then back through to today. We just see that Ukraine is making some ground there, but it is just very small shifts in around Novoporivka into Verbove here as well. Now, this isn't going with the normal narrative of once the breakthrough occurred, that then it will just be a spearhead straight through. That hasn't occurred. There has been breakthroughs in areas of the lines, armoured vehicles through areas, but it hasn't really sped up through there like we did expect with a lot of this going forwards. Now, let's have a look at, that's the wrong map. This is what I'm looking for, War Mapper in Robotyny area, so that they have cleared some to the west and also moving into the north of Novoporivka here as well, and to the west of Verbove, that Ukraine has making some gains. So then the ISW have then released this geolocated footage on September 29th, indicates Ukraine forces advanced northwest of Robotyny. Geolocated footage on September 30th, that back in September 25th and 28th, indicates Russian forces control two westernmost trench systems south of Robotyny. A Russian source claimed Russian forces exert less control over northern Novoporivka as of September 27th. So this is basically lining up with what War Mapper has said, but also showing some small gain in here. Now let's look at see if there's actually any real noticeable difference on the maps. This one is from the 27th, and this one is then from today. Of course, they're not going to be perfect to line up. As we can just see, this little bit of yellow that was here has been taken into blue area, but as far as the overall picture of the map is still very similar in there. So of course this is really the spear point currently of the counteroffensive, but it's not really moving much in there. And if you'd like to just look at, this is then the zoomed in of today that we have got, that doesn't show really any gains here because they would then be in dark blue. So then we're going to go is up into Opitny as well. So we come to Avdiivka and then we look at Opitny here. So War Mapper has shown that Ukraine over the last 10 days has made this amount of ground. This isn't in a day, this is over the last 10 days. So moving closer into Opitny here, but I believe this map shows very similar to this. This is difficult to line up just because it's a more of a coloured map rather than the other ones, but we have Vodany Opitny in here. So more down, I believe this is this waterway here, then it doesn't show these other ones. It'd be easy to line up, but is moving more into this area here, which is what the other maps really have been showing us. But the only change that we see on the deep state at all today is we come down into Bakhmut to the south, and a very small gain just across here, across the train line to this north of Andrivka in there as well. So we do know that Ukraine has made some marginal gains across the train line in around Klishkivka and Rivka as well. The only change on the daily Ukraine map update we did see was just in Robotyny. We go back a day. So today, we do see that small gain there. That was really indicated over the last couple of days on the deep state map, just that sort of shift there as well. Now, Syriac does show one more change near Pobeda, saying he's situated south of Donetsk city. Corrections were made in this conflict, showing Ukrainian army retook some positions last week. So that Ukraine took some positions here. This is Donetsk, Pobeda, that they took some areas there. But Legends, that's all that I have for you today. Trying to line up of where the counteroffensive, what it has actually got, is it dying off from there? But Legends, I hope you've had a fantastic day. If you'd like to support me, links down below, but never feel obliged. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.